Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to today's webcast, Coffee with eBay, brought to you by eBay itself. I'm Mary Windishar, today's moderator, and I have just a few tips before we begin. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. The slides will advance automatically throughout today's event, and if they don't, you might have a technical problem. So for help, click on the help link below the media player. During today's live event, there's a phone number you can also call for assistance. This webcast will be interactive between you and our presenters. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the presentation. All you have to do is type them into the Ask a Question text area and then click the Submit button. We'll try to address as many questions as possible. And we've also received some questions via email. We'll be discussing them as well today. And later in the program, I'll ask for your feedback on a special form so that you can let us know how we're doing. Now on to the presentation. Leading today's webcast is Jonathan Haney. Welcome, Jonathan. We're glad you're back.
Thank you, Mary, and good morning, sellers. This is Jonathan Haney. I lead our North American seller protection efforts. We're so glad that you could come today and really do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend. What I wanted to do quickly is kind of give you a couple little base ground rules. So we're going to get to as many questions, as Mary said, during today's session as possible. However, most of those questions should be kind of general policy level questions, suggestions, things that are good for an open forum. If you have specific questions about an active case, or if you have questions about buyers who you feel like might be bad actors, we ask you to either contact customer service or to use our Report a Buyer feature. Additionally, we're going to do our best to get to all the questions. However, if we don't get to a specific question, we have a seller protection discussion board out on the eBay community site. You can see on the slide, the email address is tinyurl.com/spboards. Again, tinyurl.com/spboards. We have teammates out there that review that board, and we'll be able to come back and answer some questions. Now, as Mary said, this is Coffee with eBay, and we were trying to figure out how to get coffee to all of you guys. First thought was maybe I could just come around and bring coffee to everybody. However, I am not Santa Claus. I can't go that fast, so I had to strike that one off the list. My next thought was we have 3D printing. Can we do that? Well, unfortunately, 3D printing hasn't yet figured out how to solve liquids.
To the questions,
so our fail-safe to get you your latte this morning is a Starbucks gift card. Following this event, you'll receive an email from Starbucks that will have that, and feel free to go and have a coffee on us. Greatly appreciate your time. Now, you guys see that we have these really great mugs here. We're going to have, over the course of this presentation, some survey questions, quiz questions, if you will. As we go through those, we'll share the results, and if you answer the question correctly, we'll be able to give these away to many of you listeners out there. So, enough for housekeeping. Now I want to introduce my two guests that I have with me that are going to help me answer these questions. So Ismael, welcome again. Would love a quick background about yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Jonathan. Glad to be here today. My name is Ismael Benhamida. Been at eBay for about 2.5 years, and I manage feedback systems, strategy, and policy for North America.
Great. Thanks again for coming out. I know you were at our feedback workshop as well. Additionally, I have Don Foltz with us as well. Don, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Don Foltz. I have been at eBay for about 12 years. I've worked in a number of areas of trust, most recently joining the North American team with Jonathan and Ish, focusing on buyer protection.
Great. Thank you so much for attending as well. I have two quick overview slides that I'd like to go through just to highlight for all of our sellers what the seller protection team does. So first of all, as you think about seller protection, we really think about it in kind of three pieces. We have our foundation, the policies. We layer on that technology, and then finally we have the people on the top. Let me talk through each one of these quickly. First of all, the policies. This really forms the basis of what we do. And as we look at this, we have two sides of these policies, a seller-facing side and a buyer-facing side. We do this so that we set the rules and the ground rules so that you, the sellers, know what to expect, and conversely, so the buyers know what to expect in terms of what should a successful transaction on eBay look like. Given that we have millions and millions of transactions that happen every day, we then think about that second layer, the technology. How do we figure out which transactions are the risky transactions that we need to spend much more time on. Here, we utilize the best of Silicon Valley big data technology as we literally slice through the millions of transactions to flag those for which we should protect our sellers or for which we feel like there might be a bad actor on the buyer side. And for those, that's really the science side. We then turn to the art side, which is our seller protection team. And within here, this is where we really look through the details of the buyer, the seller, and the transaction to figure out what to do, both on individual transactions and buyers, as well as more corporately across all of our programs. And as we do that, our goal is really to continue to advance the seller and making eBay a fair and safe marketplace. How do you feel this protection? You feel this in three ways. Quality buyers that we deliver, how we safeguard your reputation, and then finally how we protect your business. Let me give you a couple nuggets on how each of these work. So quality buyers. This is the one where, as you guys see the unpaid items and then those bad actors. We are going out against those and actively working to reduce those buyer populations so that every buyer that you get is somebody who is going to pay and going to make a successful transaction at the start end. I firmly believe that this is eBay's responsibility to make sure that you guys have the good buyers, and we are making the investments on our side to do that. Secondly, safeguard your reputation. Give you a quick snapshot. I just finished up looking at how do we safeguard sellers' reputations around the recent Colorado floods. As you guys may remember, the horrible flooding that was in the Denver, Boulder, Colorado area. And in that event, we went out and we said, if there's any sellers that are impacted by this event, we're going to automatically protect your reputation. Awesome. So now we're actually doing that business. And then finally, around protecting your business. I think the best example of this is our ETRS grace period that recently launched. And as you think through this, what we're doing is we look at your business and we say, if you're still delivering great customer service, yet you have an internal process issue, for instance, you're at the 85 to 90% tracking uploaded within your staging handling time, we realize that's a spot where we need to come alongside you and partner with you so that you can fix your internal business practices while at the same time making sure that your standing in the community doesn't dip while you work on the inside. So just some nuggets around how our seller protection is actively working today. So with that, I'd really love to just get into the questions.
Great. Well, you promised a mug for anybody who could answer the quiz, so we'll go ahead and give you that first quiz right now. This is a question that we'll have you answer. It'll show up right in your your tool for this webcast. So here I go. I guess I'm better at talking than working my computer. You know what? I'm going to ask if you could do that, Travis, if you could push that poll every time I try to do it. It's not going out. Oh, there it is. All right, good. I did it. Here it is. What should a seller do when he or she feels that a buyer is violating eBay policies? So type your answer right there into the box. The first person who gives us the correct answer, well, you're going to send them a mug, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so you'll have a little bit of time to do that as we go through some of the questions that came to us via email. So the first one's for you, Dawn, and it's from Tim. So Tim says, I've been seeing the new ads on site for buyer protection. What's different with the program?
So nothing has really changed with the buyer protection program. What you're seeing are some updated banners. We've moved from the shield that we historically had to some faces of our executives or people who work on the team. We've additionally moved the placements around a little bit, but they're not anywhere they haven't been in the past. We do this as part of one of our goals is to bring buyers to eBay, and we found that the more aware buyers are of the buyer protection program, the more they come to eBay and the more they're likely to think about eBay before making a purchase. So we try to create that awareness and maintain that awareness of our buyers, and refreshing those banners is part of that initiative.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, our next question is again for you, Don, so you're kind of popular today. Kathy wants to know, how can a seller protect themselves against international buyers who open a claim after not receiving an item, considering it can take sometimes over 45 days for a buyer to receive the shipment?
Absolutely, and we've got a little bit of good news on this front, but I'll start with, how do I protect myself against buyers who are opening a claim because their claim window is closing? For that, I think there are a few things. Number one, keep the communication lines open and set that expectation with those buyers. Beyond that, we can't prevent the buyer from opening a claim if they feel they haven't received their item and their claim window is closing. However, the protection isn't generally necessary unless and until that gets escalated. And if eBay customer support can see that it's in transit, we'll usually put a hold on the claim and ask the buyer to wait because we understand the circumstances. All that said, we understand that the static 45-day window isn't probably optimal. So what was recently announced, and something you'll get some more details on shortly, is we're changing that window to be 30 days from the estimated delivery date in the coming months. So a person in Brazil who has a delivery date of 21 days will now have a 51-day window rather than a 45.
Okay, great. So I just want to remind you, if you want to answer our poll question or our contest question, all you have to do is type your answer into the box you see right there on the screen and then hit submit answer, and your answer will be registered, and the first one with the right answer will win that eBay Cup. Okay, Ish, you are up. This one is from Izzy, and Izzy says, is international shipping time calculated into detailed seller ratings?
So no, for North America, essentially any buyer, essentially your seller performance score, whether it's top rated or standard, is determined by DSRs left by domestic buyers. So you don't have to worry about detailed seller ratings left by international buyers impacting your performance. Those DSRs, they are taken into account in the average DSR calculation, which is displayed on the feedback profile page.
Let me just also add on to that, right? There are other different types there are standards programs in each of the countries, and so that low DSR may affect your rating or your standard if somebody's purchasing.
That's their fault, not ours. Buffering.
Say on the UK site.
Correct. So your seller performance status in Germany, for example, would be impacted by a low DSR coming from a German buyer, but it would not impact your seller performance status in the U.S.
Thanks, Ish. Okay, this one is for you, Jonathan. Bennett wants to know, I was wondering how seller protection actually protects us when a freight forwarder or otherwise a middleman is involved in the transaction. A few times I have noticed that a large buyer that serves as a conduit will purchase quite a few things and then have them shipped to a stepping stone location before going to the final destination. So is our obligation to the buyer done after it's reached this point?
Good question.
Thanks, Mary, for the question. And it's really, the answer to this one is a bit of a twofold answer. So as I think about it, I kind of break the world into two pieces. So number one, I break the world into buyer protection. And from a buyer protection case, if that item is delivered to that freight forwarder, that is the location at which we consider the transaction done. And then if we have proof of shipment beyond that freight forwarder, then we can't really control whether or not that item is as described or if it got damaged in the second leg of transit. Yeah. So from that perspective, the seller is protected. However, the other spot I would add, though, is you also need to be concerned about that buyer and that buyer experience. And so there, in terms of your neutral and negative feedback that you may receive for that, that's a spot where you need to make sure that that buyer is satisfied. And so as you think through that, that's a spot where you just need to make sure that you manage the expectations with that buyer and help the buyer understand that they are going outside of what standard eBay practices are for a majority of our buyers on the site. And just make sure that they feel like they have a good transaction, or if they don't, they understand the risks involved. So it's hard to say that there's a one-size-fits-all on this one, and it's a spot where we're actually working actively to say, this is why GSP and the Global Shipping Program came into play, so that we don't have to use freight forwarders. We can get that product to that end customer's hands in a fully tracked, fully managed process instead of leaving it to our buyers to figure out the process themselves.
Great, thank you very much. So Ish, here's a question for you. This is from Tom, and he says, why are sellers allowed to only leave positive feedback for buyers?
Yeah, we removed the ability of sellers to leave negative feedback for buyers about 5 years ago. We did that, one, because that's really the norm in commerce, whether it's online or offline today, that retailers don't generally publicly rate the buyer. Now, they sometimes do privately rate the buyer if you have a buyer who's returning items over and over and over. We really took that philosophy at eBay and said, we want to get useful information on buyer performance. And so we created a feedback system for sellers to give feedback on buyers to eBay. And that's called the Report a Buyer system, which Jonathan was talking about a few minutes ago. We allow you to essentially leave a negative feedback via this private and anonymous feedback system that eBay uses. This information is actually very useful because it allows eBay to look at the data and then decide which buyers should be on the site and which buyers shouldn't.
I know one of the things that I hear a lot from sellers is specifically around the non-paying buyer, and that they want to alert other sellers about non-paying buyers. And I would just add that we have the Report a Buyer tool for a lot of the instances of excessive issues. But for non-paying buyers, that's a spot where specifically we have the unpaid item functionality, which I'm sure all of our sellers know about. But that's really a great signal because that's a spot where we keep track of things and in the books, if you will, of how many of those cases get opened and get closed so that we can proactively take action on those buyers.
Agreed. And so eBay's in the background taking action against buyers who have very high rates of unpaid items. But you as a seller also have the ability to dial up and down the types of buyers you want to deal with. You can go into the buyer requirements page and essentially select, the unpaid item rate for buyers, and then you can essentially block some buyers who have not high rates, but who've had a few unpaid items.
Great. Well, Ish, we have another question for you. This time it's from John. What shall we as sellers do when an inexperienced buyer who does not necessarily understand the process of leaving feedback leaves negative feedback for a really simple reason and then refuses to remove it?
Yeah. So I would try and think about this problem upstream a bit, which is when you see a buyer who is brand new to the site, maybe a zero feedback buyer, one feedback, you should keep in mind that they're probably coming from experiences that have been very high retail standard. Yeah. They may have been shopping at high-end retailers or other e-commerce sites. You really want to delight that buyer, make them want to come back to eBay. So I think, let me make sure I package it well, I ship it on time, upload tracking, answer questions promptly. If you do all these, you'll most likely eliminate the chance you'll even get any low feedback. But if something happens
The most important thing is to email
and the buyer's
them.
upset, I'd encourage you to reach out to them, try and fix the issue. Be polite, of course. And if they're still unwilling to remove the feedback after you've tried to fix it and maybe offered to send a feedback revision request, then you can always call eBay customer support if you feel the feedback is unwarranted and removable under our current policy.
Okay, great. So Ish, this is the question for you from Mike. He says, why are DSRs or detailed seller ratings anonymous?
Yeah. Detailed seller ratings are anonymous because we want buyers to be able to give eBay and essentially we want them to be able to give eBay information about what they thought about the transaction without fear of retaliation from the seller or fear of just not, they don't want to leave feedback at all or DSRs because they're worried about the seller reaching out to them and being upset and causing a confrontation.
Great. All right, Jonathan, what can we as sellers do to encourage someone to pay?
Certainly. Couple of points here, and I think I want to take this in two directions. So number one, let me talk about what eBay's doing for you on your behalf. Right now, we're in the process of rolling out. If an item is a buy it now item, we're working to a world where a sale doesn't happen until the payment actually is received. And I'm sure we'll get questions and we'll get into the details of that later on in today's discussion. Something to keep in mind that is in the process of getting rolled out over the course of this year and should be by the end of the year. So if you're selling buy it now, that's really how we're attempting to solve that. Now, if you're doing auctions or if you aren't fully into that program yet, this is really a spot where I would recommend that unpaid item case that I referenced before. When you file the unpaid item case, what happens there is that actually alerts eBay that we need to step in. And so that's where communications will begin coming from eBay to say, hey, please remember to pay your your buyer or your seller, and we send that to the buyer. And then after 4 days, at that point, you as the seller can say, you know what, they haven't paid. I'm done waiting for this buyer. When that happens, we block the ability of that buyer to leave feedback, and you as the seller have the opportunity to relist the item. That's a manual process that can be done in the Resolution Center, or we have an automated process to do that for you, and you can find that through, it's called the Unpaid Item Assistant.
That's good.
Right. All right, this question's for you, Don. The question is, and by the way, thank you to Kim for that last question. This one is for you, Don, from Guy. And Guy says, if a buyer returns an item and I receive it with parts missing or broken, how does eBay protect me as a seller?
That's a good one.
Right. So handling returns is one of our more challenging issues as an e-commerce seller, period. Things don't always go right. Buyers aren't as nuanced in the ways of packaging things. And sometimes pieces are just missing. What I would say here is if this is not part of an open case, if it's part of a normal return, simply reach out to the buyer and see if you can get that from them. If you feel the part was intentionally left out, report that buyer, and we'll get that into our reported buyer flows and to our abuse team that looks into these cases, and we'll get that buyer off the site. If it's part of an open case, and this was returned as part of a case, reach back out into customer support and we'll help negotiate with that buyer to find the item and see if we can get it sent back. I would add that I think we as a team feel that it's our job to keep delivering the right buyers to you. And so if we're delivering buyers that are, for example, outside of missing or broken parts, intentionally sending back empty boxes or things like that, it's our job to make sure those buyers don't get into our system and to remove them as quickly as possible. We can't shield sellers from all cases of returns, and sometimes that's part of doing business, but we'll do our best not to let those buyers impact your business.
Again, another reason to use the report a buyer system.
Absolutely.
You've had these kind of experiences.
Absolutely, and if I could just chime in one more thing, I think that's actually our new returns product, Hassle-Free Returns, is actually one of those spots where we've recognized that if we just ask this buyer and the seller to solve it between themselves, it yields frustration on both sides. And so that's why the Hassle-Free Returns program is coming into play to actually act as that middleman. So if you're in the return center, all you have to do in those situations is just say, I have a returns issue. eBay, will you please step in? I don't feel comfortable refunding my buyer. And then that entire process that you just talked about with the claims process comes into a normal return as well.
Absolutely, that's a great point.
And it allows sellers to do what they do best. I think that'd be pretty nice too.
Yeah, exactly. List and sell and
Yeah.
minimize your effort that you have to deal with post-transactional efforts.
That's right. So Ish, we have a question for you from Kristen. Is it okay to honor a buyer's request to change the address of the item after he or she has paid and still be protected?
Yeah, so I think there's a few dimensions to this problem. One is with respect to protection from negative feedback. You'd definitely be protected from a negative feedback if a buyer paid with address X, then sent you a message asking you to ship with address Y. We would remove any feedback if you were unwilling to ship to that address. With respect to claims, if we think about the eBay buyer protection claims, that system will recognize alternate addresses that the buyer requests you to send to in the eBay members messaging system. But PayPal claim system currently does not recognize these addresses, and so you would not be protected in the case of a PayPal claim. So if you want to be completely protected in both the eBay buyer protection and the PayPal claim systems, what I'd suggest you do is send a polite note to the buyer saying that you're going to refund the payment and then ask them to resend the payment using the correct address that they want to send to.
Chris and I just call out. I think that this is a less than desirable customer experience, both for buyers and sellers, and us on this team listening to the seller's feedback, bringing that back into the eBay community. I think this is one that we need to take back and figure out if we can get resolved and improve the experience for both sides.
Yeah, this is a perfect example. Over the last few years, we've been aligning PayPal and eBay policies, but this is one of them we need to make progress on.
Absolutely.
Right. Thank you. Look at that. You're making a difference, as you said in your questions. So, Don, Scott wants to know, I recently had a buyer case filed as item not described 75 days after the sale. So what is the maximum number of days that buyers have to file a case? 75 days is way too much, and PayPal only allows 60 days to issue a refund.
I agree. 75 days is too much, and this can be a confusing experience. So let me explain what happened here. About 6 months ago, we changed our buyer protection flows and essentially collapsed the member-to-member flow with the buyer protection flow. What the date beyond which a case can impact a seller from a standards perspective or any other way is 45 days. What you're seeing here is we wanted to leave that method of communication open, so if a buyer does have an issue and wants to communicate with their seller on day 60 or day 70, they still can. We don't want to turn those communication paths off altogether. So when the buyer comes into that flow, it does come in to the resolution center, and it looks as if it's a case because we want those to be in one place so that you know where to go to deliver the right customer experience. However, the buyer won't be able to escalate that case, and eBay will not get involved, so it can't impact seller performance or anything else.
Great, thank you, Don. All right, Jonathan, this one is for you. It is from Ward. I get too many newbies bidding on things or buying and either not paying or emailing me asking to cancel their order. How can we minimize that from happening?
Great question, Ward. And honestly, I think this is a lot of stuff that I feel like we hit on some of the earlier questions, which is really just to recap a couple things. So, number one, fixed price will eliminate this immediately, as buyers that come in that buy fixed price items, they have to pay before that item becomes quote unquote theirs. The other thing that will happen in these types of cases is, as Ish talked about, the buying requirements pages, and that you can set specific limits to happen there. And then the third thing is, again, highlight for us through the unpaid item flow that you're having an issue, and we'll go out and we'll reach out on your behalf.
Thank you very much. All right, another one for you, Jonathan. This time it's from Debbie. Why do I have non-paying bidders that can remove an item from the quantity available on my listings when your new policy states that the item will remain available to all buyers until payment is received?
Excellent. Debbie, you're forcing me now to dig into the weeds on our new immediate pay solution, and so let me talk through that. So the way that this is working and the way that we've rolled it out is we've really had a couple of options to think about how to roll it out, and both of them had downsides on both sides. The way we decided to do it was to go look at buyers strategically, and so we have been rolling this out incrementally to buyers. So if I'm a buyer who's in the program, all of my transactions will be immediate pay, and so it won't get sold until I receive payment. However, my friend Ish here may not be in the program yet, as we're slowly starting to ramp it up to walk our way in and learn. And so he will be under that old system. And so what you're seeing in the interim here between when the first person got enrolled until everybody gets enrolled is you'll have people in both sides or both spectrums. And so the thing for you as a seller is you need to assume that everybody is in. But as we work through it, more and more people will get in. And so that's a spot where I know at the beginning we had a lot of concerns or a lot of complaints around setting up free shipping discounts. How do I start collapsing orders together to help save on shipping? There's some excellent resources out on our help pages on how to do that. But that's what you're really seeing, Kim, as we're pulling these two programs together, and we're walking from where we were in January to where we will be. And so you're kind of seeing this stair step as we go through that. So I apologize for it, but we are making strides and getting as active as we can to solve it.
Great. So one more question before we announce who won the contest, at least the first contest, and then we'll also get on to the questions that you're sending to us via chat right now. So anyway, this one is for you, Don, and it's from Edmund. Why not require a buyer to communicate with the seller before opening a case?
So one of the principles we have in the buyer protection program is that after a case is opened, the seller has some set window of time to close that experience, make the buyer happy before eBay gets involved. If we step back about 6 months, we had a buyer protection flow that this was the experience. The buyer contacts the seller because they had an issue. Didn't get resolved, so they contact eBay and they open a case. To continue to deliver that principle, we asked the buyer at that point to go talk to the seller. These were redundant conversations. They were frustrating for the buyer, they were frustrating for the seller. So what we did was collapse that. So these conversations only have to take place once. But to maintain the principle of, you know what, sellers, you have a set period of time to make it right before we get involved once a case is opened, and only have that conversation one time, we need to put it in the case flow.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so now I have good news. The answer to the first, and correct me if I'm wrong here, to our first question, which was what should a seller do when he or she feels a buyer is violating eBay's policies? Question is, report a buyer. Okay?
That's exactly right.
And you were exactly right, Irene G., when you said that answer, and so you've won the first prize. That's, once again, this amazing eBay cup. I really love this cup. I do. Now we can move on to our second question, because there's another chance for you to win a cup, and that is, the question here is, here we go. Name one new protection that was put into place this year for sellers. Name one new protection that was put into place this year for sellers. Type your answer right there in that box you see. Hit submit answer and you're good to go, and maybe you'll win. All right, here we go. This is now our first question from our audience today. This is, oh, I love this question, Don. How do you handle a customer that returned an empty package for refund? This is from Nachima.
You report them to eBay. That's the simple answer. These are the buyers that we clearly want to take off our site, but sometimes we don't know that's happening if we don't get the right reports. So the first thing I would do is come to eBay and report the buyer. Clearly, you could try to reach out to the buyer as well if you think it potentially could have been an accident. I'm guessing it wasn't. Yeah, but in these cases, this unfortunately is one of those returns costs of doing business on the internet. We can't catch them all up front, but if we get the reports, we can get the buyers off the site as soon as we see a pattern in the data.
Okay, great. Thanks, Don. Ish, Jennifer wants to know, if I open an unpaid item claim against a buyer and then pay, and then they pay. Okay, so open up the unpaid item claim, then they pay. But I'm angry because I opened a claim and leave a negative. Is that grounds for removal?
So I want to understand the question. You're saying the buyer left the negative for the seller and didn't pay.
The seller opened an unpaid item claim against a buyer, and then that buyer pays. Yeah. Oh, but the person is angry. Okay, I thought Jennifer was angry. No. the person is angry because I opened a claim and left a negative.
I think the buyer leaves a negative
and
pays, but due to the sole fact that they opened a UPI case.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, so that feedback would not be specifically removable, but what I think about is, in being customer-centric and trying to solve this upstream, if you have a buyer who bought something, maybe they didn't read the description well, or there was a miscommunication and they bought the item, I think, you can just cancel the transaction as well. And if the buyer left you the negative feedback due to nothing that was your fault, that feedback is removable because you canceled the transaction.
Okay, great. So we will now come to you, Jonathan. The question is, and it's from Karen, how can we get our products back in the market sooner if the buyer hasn't paid for them?
Certainly. So again, I think the easiest answer to this one is the UPI assistant or unpaid item assistant. It's a setting that you go into your eBay preferences to look for, or just search on our help pages for unpaid item assistant. What that does is, as you walk through it, it's a relatively simple flow where you say if a buyer hasn't paid within X number of days, and that can be as soon as 2 days after the auction ends or the commitment to purchase happens, you will automatically open an unpaid item case. At that time, the buyer receives a communication, and then they have 4 days to pay. So essentially 6 days after the end of the auction or the commitment to purchase, then that case closes and that inventory returns back to site. With that process, you can actually click a button there to say automatically relist to site. And so when that happens, Everything happens automatically. You can choose to get notified or not, but it just simply happens, and you don't have to spend time worrying about that. You let our computers on the back end figure that out for you.
Great. All right, Don, question for you from Christine. Why are buyers able to open a case for an item not received when tracking clearly shows that the item was delivered?
Absolutely fair question. So I'd like to come at this from the buyer's perspective. I'm a buyer. I haven't received my item. Tracking may show delivered, but I ordered something from eBay and I don't have my item yet. For that reason, we still want to know about it, and I think we want our sellers to know about it so you can help them through the process of identifying what might have happened to their item. Buyers aren't necessarily aware of the nuances of tracking, what can happen in the delivery process, that things do get stolen off porches if they've never had it happen before. So you can help them navigate that, work with their carrier to track down the item. So for that reason, I think it's good for them to contact somebody with that experience. If it's delivered to the address on file, sellers won't be held accountable for it. So if it gets escalated to eBay, sellers won't be held accountable, but it's still a good conversation for the buyer to have with eBay and with their seller to help them figure out what went wrong.
Great.
You know, a couple of things that I hear from a lot of other sellers when this happens is, you know, if that case happens to you, like the thing that I hear a lot is just send them a nice note and say, my tracking shows delivered, here's the tracking number. Have you checked with other people in the house? Have you checked with neighbors?
Exactly.
See if you can try to figure out where that package is, because a lot of times it is there.
Right.
Occasionally it may get stolen off the porch. I know, wasn't an eBay transaction. It's happened to me with another e-commerce transaction, so I know that stuff happens, but that's kind of the first step I hear from a lot of sellers on how they go about solving these issues.
Yeah, and I think that's the right and great advice. It is, but buyers really haven't had all of the experience with package delivery that I think most of our sellers and we have, so they forget that someone in their house picked it up and took it upstairs.
Right.
Things like that. And you just have to remind it and kind of push them along to help them track down what could have happened.
Great. All right, Ish, question for you. This one's from John, and it is, why can't negative feedback be given to a buyer that doesn't pay for an item?
So, as I spoke about earlier, we essentially have a negative feedback that you can leave for the buyer, but it's a private and anonymous feedback, which is actually much more useful when you think about it. That private signal, one, sellers aren't necessarily adverse to giving it because the buyer's not going to see it, doesn't cause confrontation. But that signal then comes to eBay and allows us to, effectively manage essentially buyer performance on the site. Imagine what a public negative does is, doesn't actually do that much for a buyer. The buyer could still click buy it now or bid on your item.
All right, Jonathan, question for you from Barbie. Where is the seller protection when a buyer can damage your goods, open an item not described case, and then get their money back? There's absolutely no recourse for the seller.
So this is one of these instances that unfortunately, we don't see either side of the transaction. So it's a spot where we wind up with a he said, she said. So the seller is telling us this story and we believe you. The buyer is telling us it arrived damaged and we believe you. So the question is on those, like, which one do we believe, or how do we balance these? And so in many of those instances, this is the spot where the simple fact is a lot of times we side with the buyer in these cases. And why do we do that? Because we found that as you side with the buyer, those buyers will come back and they will purchase from eBay, they will purchase from your store. Maybe they had a bad situation with another store, they'll come back and purchase from your store perhaps as a follow-up. But they're staying on the site, they're staying in our ecosystem. And so as we look at that, we think that's a good thing for all of our sellers. But as Dawn has talked about, when we see this happening multiple times, this is the spot where we are beginning to say, you know what? I'm going to start taking one person's side of the story much more seriously than the other person's side of the story. And the rationale for that is just because we're starting to see this pattern. And it may be malicious. It may be not malicious. It may just be the zip code that they deliver in or that they live in is a high stolen off the porch zip code. Don't know. But what we're seeing is that there's increased risk that buyer is bringing to eBay and to our community. And that's the spot we'll begin to step in and take actions on the seller's behalf. So, for instance, it happens once, That's one of those instances. You know, take my stolen off the porch. I've had one stolen off the porch type of scenario. You guys look at me. Do I look malicious or not? We don't know. But it happens to even good sellers. And so when we see that one instance, I know it's painful for our sellers. And I hear that from you guys. The challenge is as we look on the other side of the table is who's there. 99% of the time, it's another person who, if you looked them face to face, you'd be like, that's another good and trustworthy character too. And that's the spot where most of our cases wind up.
Yeah. All right.
I'd call out one thing. I was actually sitting with the report a buyer team yesterday, looking at some filtering they had done of buyers who they had taken off the site for these types of claims and whatnot. And I can tell you that we're delivering buyers to you that if they are filing a claim like this, it's probably because they honestly feel that it wasn't as described. We should have very few buyers who are filing these maliciously because we're taking so many of those off the site.
Great. All right, the one for you again, Ish. Susan says, with so much emphasis on feedback for sellers, why can't eBay request buyers to contact sellers first before leaving negative feedback? Sellers can't fix a problem. They don't know it exists until they read it in a feedback.
Yeah, so we try to strike the balance, which is when a buyer goes to leave negative feedback, we actually have a message that says, that tells them that sellers want to make the transaction right, and we encourage them to reach out. We don't require they send a message at this point, but we know that a lot of times buyers actually do reach out to the seller before leaving negative feedback. If you do get that negative feedback, we encourage you to reach out to that buyer, try and resolve the issue, and then you can always use the feedback revision system to request that the buyer revise the feedback and detailed seller ratings they left.
Let's stick with you just for a second on this one, for another question. This one's from Anne, and Anne says, what does seller protection do or plan to do in regards to buyers who leave positive feedback narrative, who leave a positive feedback narrative and do not communicate that there was any problem, yet leave a 1 or 2 star DSR? I recently had this happen to my shipping cost DSR, although I do offer.
Yeah. So understand that positive feedback with low DSRs, it can either essentially be one of two things. A buyer who's trying to be malicious maybe, or the much more common use case, which is it's a buyer who there's some element of the transaction they were unhappy with. They just don't want to publicly state it and leave that negative feedback, but they are expressing their discontent. We have very sophisticated models in the background that look at all of the claims and unpaid item cases and neutral and negative feedback and low DSRs that buyers leave, and essentially judge, do we think that this is useful input, and should this buyer be allowed to leave feedback which counts against sellers? So we're doing a lot in the background to ensure that this sort of that malicious buyer scenario isn't impacting you as a seller.
If I can chime in with a couple of thoughts. As I think about this question, I think about a useful analogy for me as I've gone through this process. One of the things I've thought of is a restaurant. A lot of times we'll go to a restaurant and we'll sit down and we'll have a great meal, or we'll have a meal, right? Wasn't probably the greatest meal in the world. Maybe food came out cold or something like that. The server comes by and asks you what your experience is. A lot of times you'll probably say fine. But then at the end of the day, if somebody outside the restaurant asked you what your experience are, you'll probably tell them, well, the food came out cold, I didn't get my water cup refilled enough, blah, 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 blah. And I think a lot of that is that anonymity piece of it gives us a little bit better signal back on that. And actually, one of the things I like about the detailed seller ratings is how we use that information on the back end to turn it around and actually give sellers coaching to say, hey, we've noticed that you have, a trend in, call it your ship time DSR. Here's some options, or here's some solutions to attempt to potentially arrest what we're seeing as a trend on our back end before it turns into something much more severe. And so while we don't share on a transaction by transaction level what those numbers are, we're queuing it up in the background to try to give back to sellers. Here's the coaching points, or here's the education for that.
Absolutely. That anonymous information, and if you see your low DSR rates rise, really dig in. We have tools to dig in and give you information like, where are these low detailed seller ratings coming from regionally and whatnot. Encourage you to look into those, and because it's really honest input from the buyer as to what could be done better. So.
And I'd like to add one point onto that, and you touched on it, but just that a low DSR, a single low DSR, does not necessarily mean it's a negative experience. I've had a lot of great experiences that were perhaps slow in shipping, but the product was great. I got it at a good price, but the shipping was slow. I'm not going to go out and leave low DSRs for it, but if we're asking buyers to honestly rate a certain aspect, there are some aspects that don't necessarily make the entire experience negative. So, the DSRs were created sort of in addition to the reasons you spoke about with anonymity to allow for that flexibility. And I think this is just one aspect of that.
I just know how she feels. I always want to get an A.
I know.
We all do.
And
Yeah.
all of our sellers do. And
Yeah.
you guys are great about delivering A's the vast majority of the time.
Yeah, and I just want to say thanks to everybody for your questions, because this is a great time to get it out in the open. So, and thanks to you guys for going to keep you busy here with these. We've got lots coming in. So here's one from Armine. And Jonathan, it's for you. If a buyer is returning an item and the item gets lost in transit, am I protected?
Yeah, so, as we look at that one, it's actually a very similar situation to if a seller delivers an item and it gets lost in transit. So, and just as we ask our sellers to ensure their shipping carrier delivers that item to the buyer, conversely, we ask our buyers, with whatever shipping service they use, to ensure that item gets delivered to the seller. And it's it's the same philosophy that we take on a return as we do on an outbound.
I'll call out one thing here, which is we know that with international transactions, this is a problem. Package gets shipped, and you can see it went out. You see some scans, and then it just gets stuck somewhere. And we have a program called the Global Shipping Program, which essentially, from the seller's perspective, turns an international transaction into a domestic transaction. The buyer could be located in one of many countries, and the seller just has to deliver the package to an eBay partner's warehouse in the U.S. And once they've done that, the seller is completely protected from, a long delivery time or any shipping cost DSRs, or if the courier broke the item in transit.
Yeah, back to doing what you do best, right? All right, Jonathan, this is from Rodney, and it's interesting because it's another shipping question as well. Does eBay monitor a seller's excessive shipping charges? Some sellers used to sell an item for a penny and then charge $75 for shipping.
Gotcha. So, Rodney, I can't remember specifically. I believe there may be one or two categories where we still have any sort of excessive shipping charge on there. However, generally, we've actually moved to a world of what you guys have called the fees on total costs. And so what we essentially are doing there is we said, you know what, instead of having the shipping be separate from the item price and then starting to have to regulate what that shipping price is, let's move to a world where we say, seller, you make the decision. You pick what business model it is. And there's two of them. And I'll just go through both extremes and explain to you why the logic is the way it is. So one extreme is you offer free shipping. And you know it's going to cost you $5 to ship it, so you price the item at $10. $5 for the item plus $5 for shipping, $10. That's there. Other extreme is, you know what, I want to have that item price low because I feel like sellers or buyers look at the item price much more than the item plus shipping price. So you do $5 for the item, $5 for shipping, and that's how you do your pricing strategy. We want to give both of those options available and open to you. And so as a result, we move to a world of we just want to make sure that the total price is what we're interested in, which is $10 on both sides, and let you as a seller figure out how you want to balance in between those two spectrums. That's collectively what our philosophy has been on this question.
Okay.
So I'd call out one thing here, which is we definitely allow the seller to determine their ship cost and item price, but what we want the marketplace to be very competitive. We know that free shipping is essentially the standard for most items. We really want sellers to adopt free shipping, and so we will reward you with an automatic 5-star detailed seller rating for the ship cost detailed seller rating if you offer free shipping. So it's not something you have to do, but it's a benefit you get if you do offer free shipping.
Great, thank you, Ish. Okay, another one for you, Ish. If tracking shows that package was delivered, but buyers still say that it wasn't and leave negative feedback, can that feedback be removed? This is from Andra.
Absolutely. The feedback and seller protection teams put together a whole bunch of new feedback removal policies, which we announced a few months ago. And this is one of them, essentially proof of delivery. If you have tracking and it shows delivery, you shipped it on time, the tracking matches up around the time of the item purchase, item shows delivered, we will remove that feedback.
Great. All right, good. We're going to have the answer to the next quiz in just a second, and we'll also be able to tell you whether or not you won. So that quiz will be answered in just a second. But now, Dawn, this one's for you from Gina. I've been trying to weave in the fact that Dawn bought a bus. In fact, 2 buses on eBay, so he knows about buying. Dawn, this is from Gina, and Gina says, buyers frequently confuse their clothing size with item is not described in cases that are opened. How does eBay handle this inaccurate reason for opening this type of case?
So this is, I just want to be clear on the question. This is a case where the correct item was ordered, the correct size was ordered, it just doesn't fit.
She's more saying that they identify the clothing not fitting as item is not as described.
Yeah.
It's as you said.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that I think we actually want to move upstream and think about. If you're selling in a clothing category, I think we all know the return rate in those is and probably should be higher than in most other categories. Right. It's an expectation that some of those clothes won't fit. So I would tackle this upstream with a return policy that fits the category you're in. If this case does come to eBay, it's really difficult to say. Each case is so unique. You read through the content that's come before, but if we look at the listing and we look at what the buyer has complained about essentially, and we see that it's been covered in the listing, the seller will be protected. To take the more extreme example of this, if it's a medium and we send a small, the buyer will win that. If it's something in between, that's something that one of our teammates will look at, talk to the buyer, talk to the seller, and make a determination on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, great.
The simplest solve here, though, is to opt into hassle-free returns. Because one of those options, as you go into hassle-free returns, you actually, if a seller has an item not as described, or a buyer thinks that it's an item not as described, and it's within your return window, you automatically pop into the hassle-free returns flow, which is an automatic return. And they'll pick the reason code that they feel like is best. But at the end of the day, that item is getting back to you, which likely is what would happen if it went into a buyer protection case as well. Yep. It's just, it saves you the hassle and the headache and frankly, the stress of having to deal with a buyer protection case, as well as just solving it for both parties as quickly as possible.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, an item didn't fit is one of the options there.
Absolutely. Right.
Yeah. I'd say that when you think about offering returns, this is really standard in commerce today, and it can be beneficial to you as a seller by offering returns. One, you won't have to deal with nearly as many cases because items will get returned. Two, you can actually achieve higher prices in auction and through Buy It Now because buyers are more confident and willing to buy. So you'll see increased transactions as well as profitability.
All right, thank you so much for all of your answers. And by the way, if we did not get to the question you may have, we'd like to ask you to visit the Seller Protection Board. That is on tinyurl.com. And this is where, I didn't finish it. tinyurl.com/SP-boards. It's tinyurl.com/S, like Peter, capital B, like boards, SP boards. All right, we have now some more exciting news for you. Name one of the new protections that was put into place this year for sellers. Jennifer N. got that right when she said feedback protection. So that's great. Now we have one more chance for you to win a cup because Jonathan has put this in as an opportunity as well, but we will just choose at random. Among the answers to the question, what's one thing that eBay can do to improve the marketplace in 2014? So there's another chance for you to just type your answer right there in that box, hit submit answer. Jonathan will pick at random one person to receive a fabulous mug. All right, so we'd like to say thanks to Jonathan and also to Ish and Dawn for all those great answers, and thank you for attending today's webcast. Coffee with eBay. Shortly after a live event, you can access this presentation on demand or refer a friend. Just wait for a personal email that'll be coming to you. Now, the presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that is the case, by eBay, who is solely responsible for their content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. So on behalf of our guests today, John Haney, Ismael, Benhamida, and also Don Foltz, and of course our virtual production team, thank you for your time and have a great day. I'm Mary Windishar.
That's it?